let us continue with the Count of Monte Cristo. Chapter 84. Beauchamp. For a whole fortnight, no one in Paris spoke of anything except this daring attempted robbery at the Count's. The dying man had signed a statement naming Benedetto as his murderer. The police were asked to put all their agents on the criminal's trail. Caderousse's knife, his shrouded lantern, his bunch of keys and his clothes, except for the waistcoat, which could not be found, were handed over to the clerk of the court, and the body was taken to the morgue. The Count told everyone that this adventure had happened while he was in the house in Antoile, and that, consequently, he knew only what he had been told by Abbé Busoni. By sheer chance, the abbé had asked the Count if he might spend the night at his house in order to do some research into one or two of the precious volumes in his library. Only Bertuccio went pale every time the name of Benedetto was mentioned in his presence, but there was no reason for anyone to notice the pallor on Bertuccio's cheeks. Villefort, called in to establish the facts of the crime, had allocated the case to himself and was pursuing the investigation with all the passionate enthusiasm that he gave to every criminal case in which he was involved. But 3 weeks had already elapsed without the most active inquiries bringing any result, and society gossips were starting to forget about the attempted robbery at the Count of Monte Cristo's and the murder of the thief by his accomplice, turning instead to the forthcoming marriage of Mademoiselle Danglars to Count Andrea Cavalcanti. The marriage was more or less arranged, and the young man received at the banker's as a future son-in-law. The elder Cavalcanti had been contacted by letter and had warmly approved of the match. Expressing deep regret that his duties absolutely forbade him to leave Parma, where he then was, he stated his intention of releasing a capital sum sufficient to give an income of 150,000 livres. It was agreed that the 3 million would be entrusted to Danglars, who would invest them. Some people had tried to sow doubt in the young man's mind about the solidity of his future father-in-law's position. Danglars had recently been making repeated losses on the exchange, but the young man, with sublime confidence and disinterestedness, dismissed all these vain murmurings, and had the tact to say nothing about them to the Baron. The Baron, consequently, adored Count Andrea Cavalcanti. The same could not be said of Mademoiselle Eugénie Danglars. Having an instinctive horror of marriage, she had welcomed Andrea as a means of repelling Morcerf, but now that Andrea was coming too close, she began to feel a visible repulsion towards him. The Baron may perhaps have noticed it, but as he could only attribute this feeling to a whim, he had pretended not to notice it. Meanwhile, the period of grace that Beauchamp had asked for had almost passed. During it, Morcerf had come to appreciate the value of Monte Cristo's advice when he told him to let the matter clear itself up. No one had remarked on the note about the general, and no one had thought to identify the officer who had betrayed the castle of Janina with the noble count who sat in the upper house. Even so, Albert felt insulted, because the intention to offend was quite obviously there, in the few lines that had wounded his honour. Moreover, the manner in which Beauchamp had ended their meeting had left a bitter taste in his mouth. For these reasons, he still harboured the idea of a duel, but hoped, if Beauchamp would agree, that they might be able to disguise the real reason for it, even from their seconds. As for Beauchamp, he had not been seen since the day of Albert's visit, and whenever anyone asked for him, the reply was that he had left for a few days' journey. Where was he? Nobody knew. One morning Albert was awoken by his valet, announcing Beauchamp. He rubbed his eyes and asked for the visitor to be shown into the little smoking parlour on the ground floor. Then he dressed quickly and went down. Beauchamp was pacing up and down, but he stopped when he saw Albert. Your decision to come and see me yourself, instead of waiting for the visit that I intended to pay on you today myself, seems to me like a good omen, said Albert. Come, tell me straight away. Can I offer you my hand and say, Beauchamp, admit your mistake and keep your friend, or should I simply instruct you to choose your weapons? Albert, Beauchamp said, with an expression of grief that astonished the young man. Let's first sit down and talk. Come, monsieur. It seems to me that before we sit down together, you must answer me. There are occasions, the journalist said, when the difficulty lies in the answer itself. Let me make it easier for you, then, by repeating my question. Do you retract, yes or no? Morcerf, one cannot answer yes or no to a question that touches on the honor, the social standing, and the life of a man like Lieutenant General the Comte de Morcerf, peer of the realm. So what can one do? One can do what I did, Albert, which is to say, money, time, and effort are nothing when it is a matter of the reputation and interests of an entire family. One says more than probability is needed. We must have certainty if we are to accept a duel to the death with a friend. One says, if I cross swords or pull the trigger against a man whose hand I have shaken over the past 3 years, I must at least know why I am doing such a thing, so that I may arrive at the appointed place with my mind at rest and the easy conscience which a man needs when he must use his arm to save his life. Very well, then, Morcerf asked impatiently. What does all this mean? It means that I have just come back from Janina. From Janina? You? Yes, I. Impossible! My dear Albert, here is my passport. Look at the visas. Geneva, Milan, Venice, Trieste, Delvino, Janina. Do you believe the authorities of a republic, a kingdom, and an empire? Albert looked at the passport, then again with astonishment at Beauchamp. You went to Janina, he said. Albert, if you had been a foreigner, a stranger, or a mere lord like that Englishman who came to challenge me 3 or 4 months ago, and whom I killed to stop him bothering me, you will realize that I would not have taken such trouble. But I thought I owed you this mark of my consideration. I spent a week on the outward journey, a week on the return, plus 4 days in quarantine and 48 hours when I arrived. That adds up to my 3 weeks. I got back last night, and here I am. My God, what a roundabout story, Beauchamp, and still you won't tell me what I am waiting to hear. The truth is, Albert, you seem reluctant. Yes, I'm afraid. Afraid of admitting that your correspondent deceived you? Now, Beauchamp, don't be proud. Admit it, no one can doubt your courage. Oh, it's not that, the journalist muttered. On the contrary. Albert went deathly pale. He tried to speak, but the words failed on his lips. My friend, Beauchamp said, in the most affectionate tone, believe me, I should be delighted if I could apologize to you, and I should do so with all my heart, but alas. But what? The report was correct, my friend. What? The French officer? Yes. This Fernand? Yes. The traitor who delivered the castles of the man in whose service he was... Forgive me for saying this, my friend. That man was your father. Albert leapt up furiously to throw himself on Beauchamp, but he was restrained more by the other's compassionate look than by his outstretched hand. Here, he said, taking a sheet of paper out of his pocket. My dear friend, here is the proof of it. Albert unfolded the sheet of paper. It was a sworn statement by 4 leading inhabitants of Janina, confirming that Colonel Fernand Mondego, army instructor in the service of the Vizier Ali Tebelin, had betrayed the castle of Janina for a payment of 2,000 purses. The signatures had been validated by the consul. Albert staggered and fell, dumbstruck, into a chair. This time there could be no doubt. The family name was there. And after a moment of painful silence, his heart swelled, the veins bulged on his neck, and a stream of tears burst from his eyes. Beauchamp, who had looked with the utmost compassion on the young man as he gave way to his grief, came over to him and said, "Do you understand now, Albert? I wanted to see everything and judge everything for myself, in the hope that the explanation would be favourable to your father and that I could do full justice to him. But on the contrary, the information that I obtained stated that the instructing officer, Fernand Mondego, promoted by Ali Pasha to the rank of Governor-General, was none other than Count Fernand de Morcerf. So I returned, reminding myself of the honour you had done in admitting me to your friendship, and I hastened round to see you." Albert, still stretched out in the chair, was covering both eyes with his hands, as if to prevent the daylight reaching him. "I hastened round to see you," Beauchamp continued, "to say this to you. Albert, the sins of our fathers, in these times of action and reaction, cannot be visited on their children. Albert, few men have gone through the revolutions in which we were born without some spot of mire or of blood staining their soldier's uniform or their judge's robe. No one in the world, Albert, now that I have all the proof, now that I am master of your secret, can force me to engage in a combat that your conscience, I am sure, would tell you was a crime. But I have come to offer you what you no longer have the right to demand of me. This proof, these revelations, these statements that I alone possess, would you like me to make them disappear? Would you like this terrible secret to remain between the two of us? Protected by my word of honour, it will never cross my lips. Tell me, Albert, would you like that? Is that what you want, my friend?" Albert fell on Beauchamp's neck. "Oh, noble heart!" he cried. "Here then," said Beauchamp, handing the papers to him. Albert seized them convulsively, crumpled them, twisted them, and considered tearing them up, but fearing that the smallest scrap might be blown away in the wind and come back to haunt him one day, he went across to the candle which he kept burning continually to light cigars, and let the flames devour them to the last fragment. "Dear friend, best of friends," he muttered as he burned the papers. "Let all this be forgotten like a bad dream," Beauchamp said. "Let it vanish like those last sparks flickering on the blackened paper, and let all fade like that wisp of smoke drifting away from those silent ashes." Yes, said Albert. "Let nothing remain except the eternal friendship that I owe to my Saviour, a friendship that my children will transfer to yours, a friendship that will always remind me that I owe you the blood in my veins, the life of my body, and the honour of my name. For if such a thing were to be known, oh, Beauchamp, I am telling you I would blow my brains out. Or else, no, my poor mother, I should not wish to kill her at the same time. Otherwise, I should go abroad." "My dear Albert," Beauchamp said. But the young man's unexpected and somewhat artificial joy was short-lived, and he soon relapsed into an even deeper melancholy. "What is it, dear friend?" Beauchamp asked. "What is it?" "What it is," Albert said, "is that something is broken in my heart. You must understand, Beauchamp, that one cannot in an instant abandon that feeling of respect, of confidence and pride that a father's spotless name inspires in his son. Oh, Beauchamp, how shall I face him? Shall I shrink back when he puts his lips to my forehead, or withdraw my hand from his touch? Oh, Beauchamp, I am the most wretched of men. Oh, my mother, my poor mother, he said, looking through tear-filled eyes at her portrait. How you would have suffered had you witnessed all this. Come, come, Beauchamp said, clasping him by both hands. Take heart. But that first note that you printed in your paper, where did it come from? Albert exclaimed. There is some secret hatred, some invisible enemy behind all this. All the more reason, then, said Beauchamp. Courage, Albert. Let nothing show on your face. Carry your sorrow inside you as the cloud conceals ruin and death like a deadly secret that is understood only when the storm breaks. Come, my friend, gather strength for the moment when the storm will break. What? You don't think it's over yet? Albert said in horror. I don't think anything, but everything is possible. By the way... What? Albert asked, seeing Beauchamp hesitate. Are you still going to marry Mademoiselle Danglars? What makes you ask that now, Beauchamp? Because to my mind the match may depend on the question that is uppermost in our thoughts just now. What? Albert exclaimed, reddening. Do you think that Monsieur Danglars... I'm merely asking how your marriage plans stand. For heaven's sake, don't try to read anything more into my words than I intend, and don't give them more significance than they actually have. No, Albert said. The engagement has been broken off. Good, said Beauchamp. Then, seeing that his friend was about to relapse into melancholy, he said, Come on, Albert, take my advice and let's go out. A ride around the Bois in a phaeton or on horseback will take your mind off things. Then we'll come back and have lunch somewhere. You can go off to your business and I'll go back to mine. Good idea, said Albert, but let's walk. I think it would do me good to tire myself out a little. Certainly, said Beauchamp, and the two friends set out on foot down the boulevard. When they got to the Madeleine, Beauchamp said, Why, since we're going in this direction, let's go and see the Count of Monte Cristo. He'll take your mind off things. He's a wonderful person for raising one's spirits because he never asks questions. In my opinion, people who don't ask too many questions give the best consolation. Yes, said Albert. Let's go and see the Count. I like him. Chapter 85. The Journey. Monte Cristo gave a cry of joy on seeing the two young men together. Ah, he said. Well, now, I hope that it's all over, cleared up and settled. Yes, said Beauchamp. Some ridiculous rumours which came from nowhere, and which, if they were to be repeated now, I should be the first to challenge. So, let's say no more about it. Albert will tell you that was my advice to him, said the Count, before adding, Now, as it happens, you find me after what I think is the most detestable morning I've ever spent. What are you doing? Albert asked. Arranging your papers, apparently. My papers? Oh, thank heavens, no. My papers are always perfectly arranged, since I have none. I'm putting some order into the papers of Monsieur Cavalcanti. Monsieur Cavalcanti? Beauchamp asked. Yes, don't you know? Said Morcerf. He's a young man that the Count is launching. Not at all, said Monte Cristo. Let's be quite clear about it. I'm not launching anyone, least of all Monsieur Cavalcanti. And he's going to marry Mademoiselle Danglars in my stead and place, which, Albert continued, forcing a smile, as you can well imagine, my dear Beauchamp, is a cruel blow to me. What? Cavalcanti to marry Mademoiselle Danglars? Beauchamp asked. What do I hear? Said Monte Cristo. Have you been away in the back of beyond? And you a journalist, the bedfellow of rumour. Parisian society is talking of nothing else. Were you responsible for this marriage, Count? Beauchamp asked. I? Hush, scribbler, don't even whisper such a thing. I go a matchmaking? Never. You don't know me. On the contrary, I opposed it as strongly as I could. I refused to make the formal request. Oh, I understand, said Beauchamp, for the sake of our friend Albert here. For my sake? Said the young man. Oh, no, not a bit of it. The Count will support me when I say that I always begged him, on the contrary, to break off the engagement, which has now fortunately been broken off. The Count claims that he is not the person I should thank, so, like the ancient Romans, I'll raise an altar to the unknown god. Listen, said Monte Cristo, so little is this to do with me that I have fallen out both with the father-in-law and with the young man. The only one still to hold me in some affection when she saw the extent to which I was disinclined to make her renounce her precious liberty is Mademoiselle Eugénie, who doesn't appear to me to have a marked vocation for the married state. And you say this marriage is about to take place? Yes, in spite of everything I could say. I don't know the young man myself, though they say he is rich and comes from a good family, but that's just hearsay as far as I'm concerned. I repeated all this, time and again, to Monsieur Danglars, but he is besotted with his Lucan. I even told him about what seems to me the more serious fact, namely that the young man was kidnapped, carried off by gypsies, or mislaid by his tutor. I'm not sure which. What I do know is that his father lost sight of him for 10 years, and God only knows what he did during that time. Well, none of that made any difference. I have been asked to write to the Major to request some papers from him. Here they are. I'm sending them on, but at the same time, like Pilate, I wash my hands of it. What about Mademoiselle d'Armilly? Beauchamp asked. How does she feel about you, now that you're taking her pupil away? I really can't tell, though it seems she is leaving for Italy. Madame Danglars mentioned her to me and asked me for some letters of recommendation to impresarios. I gave her a note for the director of the Teatro Valle, who owes me a favour, but what's wrong, Albert? You seem quite miserable. Could you perhaps be in love with Mademoiselle Danglars without realizing it? Not as far as I know, Albert said with a melancholy smile. Beauchamp began to study the pictures. You're certainly not in your usual good humour, Monte Cristo went on. Come now, what's the matter? I've got a headache, Albert said. In that case, my dear Viscount, I have an infallible remedy to suggest. One that always has worked for me whenever I have suffered some annoyance or other. What is that? The young man asked. Travel. Really? Albert said. Really. And since at the moment I have a lot that is bothering me, I'm going to travel. Would you like us to go together? You, Count? Said Beauchamp. Something bothering you? What can it be? You speak very lightly about it, as you may, but I'd like to see you with a judicial inquiry going on in your house. An inquiry? What inquiry? The one that Monsieur Villefort is engaged in against my lovable assassin, some kind of bandit who had escaped from prison, it seems. That's right, said Beauchamp. I read about it in the papers. Who is this Caderousse? Poof, it appears he is a Provençal. Monsieur de Villefort had heard speak of him when he was in Marseille, and Monsieur Danglars recalls seeing him. The result is that the Crown Prosecutor has taken the matter very much to heart, and that the Prefect of Police is apparently extremely interested in it. And the result of all this interest, for which no one could be more grateful than I am, is that for the past fortnight they have rounded up every bandit they could find in Paris and its suburbs and sent them here, alleging that they are Monsieur Caderousse's murderers. And the result of that will be that in 3 months, if it continues, there will not be a thief or an assassin in the whole fine kingdom of France who does not know the plan of my house like the back of his hand. So I've decided to abandon it entirely to them and go as far away as the earth can carry me. Come on, Viscount, I'm taking you with me.
Certainly.
So it's agreed?
Yes, but where?
I told you, where the air is pure, noise sleeps, and however proud one may be, one feels humble and small. It pleases me to be humbled in that way, since like Augustus they call me master of the universe. So, to cut a long story short, where are you going? To the sea, Viscount, to the sea. You must understand, I'm a sailor. As a child I was rocked in the arms of the old ocean and on the breast of the beautiful amphitheatre. I played with the green robe of the first and the azure robe of the second. I love the sea as one may love a mistress, and when I have not seen her for a long time, I pine for her.
Well, let's go, Count, let's go.
To the sea?
Yes.
You accept, then?
I do.
Well, Viscount, this evening in my courtyard there will be a bitritska, in which one can lie flat out, as on a bed. 4 post-horses will be harnessed to this. Monsieur Bouchon, it will easily hold 4. Would you like to join us? Let me take you.
No, thank you. I have just come back from the sea.
What? From the sea?
Yes, more or less. I've just been on a little journey to the Borromean Islands. Well, come even so, said Albert. No, my dear Morcerf. You must realize that if I refuse, it's because it cannot be done. In any case, he said, lowering his voice, I must stay in Paris, if only to keep an eye on the newspaper's postbox. Oh, you are a fine and good friend, Albert said. Yes, you're right. Watch and wait, Beauchamp, and try to find out who was responsible for this revelation.
The 2 friends took leave of one another. Their final handshake implied all that their lips could not express in front of a third person. Excellent young man, Beauchamp, Monte Cristo exclaimed after the journalist had left. Don't you think so, Albert?
Oh, yes. A man of heart. I can vouch for it. I love him with all my soul. But now we are alone, though I'm not bothered too much one way or the other, where are we going?
To Normandy, if you agree.
Perfect. Well out in the country? No visitors, no neighbours?
We shall have the company of horses for riding, dogs for hunting, and a boat for fishing. That's all.
Oh, just what I need. I must inform my mother, and then I'm all yours.
But will they let you? Monte Cristo asked.
Let me what?
Come to Normandy.
Why? Aren't I free?
Free to go where you wish, alone, I know, since I met you on an escapade in Italy.
Well, then?
But are you free to come with the man called the Count of Monte Cristo?
You have a short memory, Count.
Why is that?
Didn't I tell you how much my mother likes you?
Woman is often fickle, said Francois I, and woman is like the great waves, said Shakespeare. One was a great king, the other a great poet, so they must have known women.
Yes, women, but my mother is not women, she is a woman.
A poor foreigner might perhaps be forgiven his failure to understand all the subtleties of your language.
What I mean is that my mother is not prodigal with her feelings, but once she has given them, it is forever.
Oh, really? Said Monte Cristo with a sigh. And do you think she does me the honour of granting me any feelings other than entire indifference?
Listen, I've said it before and I repeat, you must really be a very unusual and superior being.
Oh?
Yes, because my mother is captivated. I won't say by curiosity, but by the interest that you have aroused in her. When we are together, you are the only subject of our conversation.
And did she tell you to beware of this Manfred?
No, on the contrary. She told me, Morcerf, I think the Count is a noble creature. Try to win his affection. Monte Cristo turned away and sighed. "Really?" he asked. "So you understand," Albert continued. "Far from disapproving of my journey, she will applaud it with all her heart, since it conforms with her daily instructions to me." "Very well, then," said Monte Cristo. "We'll meet this evening. Be here at 5 o'clock. We'll get there at midnight or 1. "What? To Le Tréport?" "There or near it." "It only takes you 8 hours to cover 48 leagues?" "That's a lot, even so." "You most certainly are a man of miracles, that you may and you will not only succeed in going faster than the railway, which is not too difficult, especially in France, but even go faster than the telegraph." "However that may be, Viscount, it will still take us 7 or 8 hours to get there, so be on time." "Oh, don't worry. I've nothing else to do between now and then except to get ready." 5 o'clock, then?" 5 o'clock. Albert left. Monte Cristo, after having nodded to him with a smile, remained for a moment lost in thought, as though meditating profoundly. At last, passing a hand across his forehead, as if to brush away his reverie, he went to the bell and rang it twice. At this signal, Bertuccio came in. "Monsieur Bertuccio," the Count said, "it will not be tomorrow or the day after, as I originally thought, but this evening that I leave for Normandy. From now until 5 o'clock gives you more time than you need. Alert the ostlers at the first relay. Monsieur Morcerf will accompany me. Now go." Bertuccio obeyed, and a groom sped towards Pontoise with a warning that the post-chaise will be coming by at exactly 6 o'clock. The ostler at Pontoise sent an express messenger to the next relay, and so on. 6 hours later, every relay along the route was prepared. Before leaving, the Count went up to see Haydée and announced his departure. He told her where he was going, and put his whole household under her orders. Albert arrived on time. The journey, gloomy at first, was lightened by the physical effects of speed. Morcerf had never imagined travelling so fast. "I must agree," said Monte Cristo, "that it is impossible to move forward at all when your mail travels at 2 leagues an hour, and you have this ridiculous law that forbids one traveller to overtake another without asking his permission, which means that a sick or ill-humoured traveller has the right to hold up any number of light-hearted and healthy persons on the road behind him. I avoid these handicaps by travelling with my own postilion and my own horses. Don't I, Ali?" At this the Count, leaning out of the window, gave a little shout of encouragement which lent wings to the horses. They were no longer galloping, they flew. The carriage thundered along the regal highway, and every head turned to watch this flaming meteor go by. Ali, repeating the shout, showing his white teeth and wrapping his powerful hands around the reins flecked with foam, spurred on the horses, whose fine manes were spreading in the wind. Ali, child of the desert, was here in his element, and through the dust he stirred up around him, his shining eyes and snow-white bernous, he seemed like the genie of the simoon and the god of the whirlwind. "This is a pleasure I had not previously experienced," said Morcerf, "the pleasure of speed." And the last trace of gloom vanished from his brow, as though the air that they were cleaving in their path had brushed the clouds aside. "Where in the world did you find such horses?" Albert asked. "Did you have them bred specially?" "Just so," the Count replied. 6 years ago I came across a stallion in Hungary, famous for its speed. I bought it. I don't know how much it cost. Bertuccio paid for it. In that same year, it had 32 offspring. We shall be able to inspect that entire generation of children from the one father. Each one is alike, black, without a single blemish except a star on the forehead. This privileged member of the stud had his mares chosen for him, like the favourites of a pasha." "Admirable. But tell me, Count, what do you do with all these horses?" As you see, I travel with them. But you won't always be travelling. When I have no further need of them, Bertuccio will sell them. He claims he will make 30 or 40,000 francs on the deal. There won't be a king in Europe rich enough to buy them from you. Then he must sell them to some simple vizier in the East, who will empty his treasury to pay for them and restock it by bastarding his subjects. Count, might I tell you something that has occurred to me? What is it? That, after you, Monsieur Bertuccio must be the richest individual in Europe. Well, there you are wrong, Viscount. I am sure that if you were to turn out Bertuccio's pockets, you wouldn't find 2 sous to rub together. But why is that? The young man asked. Is this Monsieur Bertuccio such a prodigy? Please, my dear Count, don't test my credulity too far, or I warn you I shall cease to believe you. There are never any prodigies with me, Albert. Figures and facts, that's all. So, consider this puzzle. A steward steals, but why does he steal? Pff, it's in his nature, I think, said Albert. He steals because he has to. No, you're wrong. He steals because he has a wife and children, and ambitions for himself and his family. Above all, he steals because he is never quite sure that he will not leave his master, and he wants to provide for the future. Now, Monsieur Bertuccio is alone in the world. He dips into my purse without telling me, and he is sure that I shall never dismiss him. How can he be sure? Because I shall never find anyone better. You're going round in circles, all based on supposition. Not at all. These are certainties. To me, a good servant is one over whom I have the power of life or death. And do you have the power of life or death over Bertuccio? Albert asked. Yes, the Count said curtly. Some words end a conversation like a steel door falling. The Count's yes was one of those words. The remainder of the journey continued at the same pace. The 32 horses, divided into 8 relays, covered the 48 leagues in 8 hours. In the middle of the night they arrived at the gateway to a fine park. The porter was awake and holding the gates open. He had been alerted by the ostler from the last relay. It was 2:30 in the morning. Morcerf was shown to his rooms. He found a bath and supper ready for him. The servant who had travelled on the rear box of the carriage was at his disposal, while Baptistin, who had travelled in front, was to serve the Count. Albert took his bath, had supper, and went to bed. All night he was rocked by the melancholy sound of the waves. Getting up the next morning, he went over to the window, opened it, and found himself on a little terrace with the vastness of the sea in front of him, and behind a pretty park adjoining a small wood. A little corvette was bobbing in a fairly large cove. It had a narrow hull and a tall mast with a flag flying from the lateen yard and bearing Monte Cristo's coat of arms, a mountain on a field azure with a cross jewels at the chief, which could also have been an allusion to his name, evoking Calvary, which our Saviour's passion has made a mountain more precious than gold, and the infamous cross which his divine blood made holy. As much as to any personal memory of suffering and regeneration buried in the mysterious night of the man's past. Around the schooner were several little boats belonging to the fishermen in the surrounding villages, which seemed like humble subjects awaiting the orders of their queen. Here, as wherever Monte Cristo stopped, even if only for 2 days, the temperature of life was raised to a high degree of comfort, which meant that life immediately became easy. Albert found 2 guns and every other piece of equipment necessary for hunting in a small room beside his bedroom. A more lofty room on the ground floor was given over to all those ingenious devices that the English, who are great fishermen because they have both patience and leisure, have so far not managed to persuade the more workaday fishermen of France to adopt. All their time was spent in these different pursuits, at which Monte Cristo excelled. They killed 12 pheasants in the park, caught the same number of trout in the streams, dined in a pergola overlooking the sea, and took tea in the library. Around the evening of the 3rd day, Albert, worn to a thread by the exertions of this life, which seemed to be a game for Monte Cristo, was sleeping at a window while the Count and his architect ran over the plan of a conservatory that he wanted to build in his house, when the sound of a horse's hoofs crushing the gravel on the path made the young man sit up. He looked out of the window, and was extremely and unpleasantly surprised to see his valet in the courtyard, having left the man behind to save embarrassment to Monte Cristo.
"Florentin!" he exclaimed, leaping up from his chair. "Can my mother be ill?"
He ran to the door of the room. Monte Cristo looked after him and saw him in conversation with the valet, who, still out of breath, took a small sealed packet from his pocket. The packet contained a newspaper and a letter.
"Who is this letter from?"
Albert asked urgently. "From Monsieur Beauchamp," Florentin replied.
"So did Monsieur Beauchamp send you?"
Yes, monsieur. He called me to his house, gave me the money for my journey, summoned a post-horse for me, and made me promise not to stop until I reached Monsieur. I covered the distance in 15 hours. Albert opened the letter, trembling. At the first lines he gave a cry and grasped the newspaper, a visible shudder running through his frame. Suddenly his eyes clouded, his knees seemed to buckle, and as he was on the point of falling, he leant against Florentin, who reached out to support him. "Poor young man," Monte Cristo muttered, so low that even he could not hear these words of compassion as he spoke them. "It is written that the sins of the fathers shall be visited on the sons, even to the 3rd and 4th generation." Meanwhile, Albert's strength had returned, and he went on reading, while shaking the hair on a head drenched in sweat. Then, crumpling both the paper and the letter, he said, "Florentin, is your horse in any good condition to return to Paris?" "It's a lame old post-horse."
"Oh, good Lord. And how was the house when you left?"
"Oh, quite calm. But when I returned from Monsieur Beauchamp's, I found Madame in tears. She called me to ask when you would return, so I told her that I was going to fetch you at Monsieur Beauchamp's request. Her first impulse was to reach out as if to restrain me, but after thinking for a moment, she said, 'Yes, go, Florentin. Let him come back.'"
"Yes, mother, yes," said Albert. "Have no fear. I am coming, and a curse on the vile slanderer. But first of all I must get started."
And he set off towards the room in which he'd left Monte Cristo. He was no longer the same man. 5 minutes had been enough to accomplish a pitiful change in Albert. He had left his usual self, and now he returned, his voice strangled, his face blotched with feverish flushes, his eyes glistening beneath blue-veined lids, and his walk unsteady like that of a drunken man.
"Count," he said, "thank you for your excellent hospitality, which I should like to have enjoyed longer, but I have to go back. I have to go back to Paris."
"What has happened?"
"A great misfortune. But please let me leave. This is something more important than life itself to me. No questions, Count, I beg you, just a horse."
"My stables are at your disposal, Viscount," Monte Cristo said. "But you will drop dead of exhaustion if you go by post-horse. Take a brougham, a coupe, some sort of carriage."
"No, that would take me too long. And in any case I need the fatigue that you fear for me. It will do me good."
Albert took a few steps, reeling like a man with a bullet wound, and slumped into a chair near the door. Monte Cristo did not see this second moment of dizziness. He was already at the window, shouting, "Ali, a horse for Monsieur de Morcerf! Hurry, he has no time to lose." These words brought Albert back to his senses. He ran out of the room, followed by the Count. "Thank you," he muttered, bounding into the saddle. "Come back as soon as you can, Florentin. Is there any password I need to get horses?" "None. Simply hand over the one you are riding, and another will instantly be saddled up for you." Albert was about to gallop off, but paused. "You may find my departure odd, even senseless," he said. "You may not realize how a few lines in a newspaper can drive a man to despair." "Well," the young man added, throwing the paper to the Count, "read this, but only after I have left, so that you do not see my shame." While the Count was picking up the paper, he dug the spurs that had just been attached to his boots into the horse's flanks, and the animal, astonished at coming across any rider who thought he needed such encouragement, went off like a shot from a sling. The Count looked after him with a feeling of infinite compassion. Only when he had altogether disappeared did he turn back to the newspaper, where he read as follows: "The French officer in the service of Ali, Pasha of Janina, who was mentioned 3 weeks ago in the newspaper L'Impartial, and who not only betrayed the castles of Janina, but also sold his benefactor to the Turks, was indeed at that time named Fernand, as stated by our honourable colleagues in that newspaper. Since then, as well as his Christian name, he has acquired a title of nobility and the name of a landed estate. Today, he calls himself Monsieur le Comte de Morcerf, and is a member of the Chamber of Peers." So the dreadful secret which Beauchamp had so generously buried had reappeared like an armed phantom, and, on the day after Albert's departure for Normandy, another newspaper had been maliciously informed and had published these few lines that drove the unfortunate young man to the brink of insanity. And I think there we shall take a break. Ooh, more drama. Lots of drama. Many dramas. Yes. Thank you for listening to this half. I hope everybody is doing well. And yeah, go do break things. Go have a nice break. And we will see you back here in about multi-drama. Exactly. Drama. Yeah. See you back here in about 5 minutes. Bye for now. welcome back. I hope everybody has had a nice break. Ow, she says, kicking the desk. Yeah, I hope everybody's had a nice break and is enjoying themselves so far and is nice and chill and has some kind of drink and comfy seat. Also, yeah, let me know what the audio is like, because, yeah, I saw someone saying earlier, who was it? Zilia, sorry, if the rain was louder than usual. It might just be that the mic was a little bit quieter, possibly. But yeah, just shout if the background rain is louder than the mic, or if everything's alright. But yeah. Yes, I hope everybody is doing well. And yeah, that's some fun drama. Everything's going drama. Woods. Yeah, I can do words. Look, I have too many words to read and my brain goes bleh. Don't rely on... Yeah, I'm not going to rely on Sam for feedback because he's literally listening to me, not through a mic. So, yeah, if anybody thinks like I could come up a bit, go down a bit, any of that, do let me know. Excuse me. Oh. But yes. Not complaining, it makes everything feel even more tense. Drama. Well, I'm glad. But yeah, I assume I'm audible and it's not... The rain isn't detracting. I hope. But also, hello, Zilia. I hope you are well and thank you for being here. Did I miss anything during that half of the stream? Doesn't look like it. Oh, I see the hat is trying... How far? 48 leagues, what? 165 miles. So if you're in Texas where the highway speed limit is 80 miles an hour, this could be done in just under 3 hours. That's not bad. But also, hang on, so how fast... What's like the top speed? Does anyone know what the top speed of a horse is? Like... Well, I suppose... Yeah, I suppose it's different for, like, do you have a horse that can... Do you have an endurance horse, a long-distance horse, or do you have a sprint horse? African or European? Very good, very good. Unladen horse. Yeah, because I was thinking 8 hours is quite a long way. Quite a long time and long way. I suppose if you're having a break when you're changing horses, a little break, then it might make it more. And Sam's gone down the rabbit hole of Monty Python quotes. Okay, right. So, on that note, shall we continue? Let us continue. We've probably got maybe two or three chapters left. Yeah, maybe 2 or 3 chapters to do tonight. Fastest horse speed ever was about 40 miles an hour. Oh, okay. So that's what? So that would... Yeah, I guess, like... But they never last long at that speed. No. Well, I guess that's why he's changing horses all the time. So I suppose... If they are, like, the world's fastest horses, and they're going 40 miles an hour, that would be, like, 6 hours going by what the hat said. Yeah, fair enough. Also, hello, Dr. Lemon Socks. I hope you are well. Welcome in. Thank you for being here. All of those lovely things. But yeah, I hope we're all sitting comfortably and are ready for undoubtedly some more drama. But that did have an 8-litre engine powering it. What did? The horse. What? The horse. Right, yeah. Oh dear. Okay. Surely it's horsepower. It's something to do. A horse with a V8. Yes. Makes a lot of noise. Okay, right. I'm... Dearing me. Let's continue, shall we? Chapter 86. Judgment is passed. At 8 o'clock in the morning, Albert stormed into Beauchamp's like a thunderbolt. The valet had been forewarned and showed Morcerf into his master's room, where Beauchamp had just got into his bath. "Well?" Albert asked. "Well, my poor friend," Beauchamp replied, "I was expecting you." "Here I am. I don't need to say, Beauchamp, that I consider you too good and loyal a friend to have spoken of this to anyone. No, my dear fellow. In any case, the message you sent me is proof of your affection, so let's lose no time in preliminaries. Do you have any idea where this blow comes from? I'll say something about that later. Yes, and first, my friend, you must tell me that story of this abominable treachery in all its details. Beauchamp told the young man, who was crushed with shame and anguish, the following simple facts. 2 days earlier, in the morning, the article appeared in a newspaper other than L'Impartial, and, something which made the matter even more serious, in a paper well known for supporting the government. Beauchamp was having lunch when the passage leapt out at him. He immediately ordered a cab, and without finishing his meal, hurried round to the paper. Although his professed political opinions were diametrically opposed to those of the managing editor of the paper making the accusation, Beauchamp and he were close friends, something that happens occasionally, or even, we might say, quite often. When he arrived, the editor was holding a copy of his own paper and apparently admiring a leader on sugar beet, probably of his own composition. "Good," said Beauchamp. "As I see you have a copy of your paper, my dear chap, I don't need to tell you what brings me." "Are you by any chance an advocate of cane sugar?" asked the editor of the government paper. "No," Beauchamp replied. "In fact, I have absolutely no ideas on the matter. I'm here for another reason." "And so why are you here?" "About the Morcerf article." "Oh, yes, indeed. Odd, isn't it?" "So odd that you are in danger of a libel case, I would think, and a very risky trial." "Not at all. With the note we received all the supporting evidence, and we are quite convinced that Monsieur de Morcerf will keep quiet. Anyway, it's a service to the country to denounce these wretches who don't deserve the honours they have received." Beauchamp was astonished. "But who gave you all this information?" he asked. "My paper, which first raised the matter, had to hush it up for lack of proof, even though we have more interest than you do in unmasking Monsieur de Morcerf, since he's a peer of the realm and we belong to the opposition." "Heavens, it's very simple. We didn't go looking for a scandal. It came and found us. A man came yesterday from Janina, bringing the incriminating dossier, and since we were all still slightly unwilling to make the accusation, he told us that if we refused, the article would appear in another paper." "Come on now, Beauchamp. You know what important news is. We don't want to let this slip through our fingers. Now it's out, there'll be terrible repercussions to the ends of Europe." Beauchamp realized that there was nothing more to be done, so he left in despair and dispatched a message to Morcerf. What he had not been able to tell Albert, because it took place after his letter had left, was that the same day there had been a great commotion in the upper house, which had broken out and spread among the ordinarily tranquil groups that made up the assembly. Everyone had arrived almost before time and was discussing the grim news that was to preoccupy public opinion and turn every eye on one of the most prominent members of that illustrious body. The article was read in a whisper, followed by an exchange of comments and recollections which gave more details about the facts. The Comte de Morcerf was not liked by his colleagues. Like all those who have risen in the world, he had been obliged to behave with a great deal of hauteur in order to maintain his rank. Great aristocrats laughed at him, talented men rejected him, and those whose reputations were justly pure instinctively despised him. The Count was in the unhappy situation of a scapegoat. Once he had been designated by the Lord's finger to be the sacrificial victim, everyone was prepared to cry him down. The Comte de Morcerf alone knew nothing of this. He did not receive the newspaper in which the defamatory article had appeared, and he had spent the morning writing letters and trying out a horse. He arrived at his usual hour, his head held high, with a proud look and insolent manner, got down from his carriage, and strode along the corridors and into the chamber, not noticing the sidelong glances of the ushers or the grudging nods of his colleagues. When he came into the chamber, it had already been in session for more than half an hour. Though the Count, as we have said, ignorant of what had happened, made no change in his look or manner, this look and this manner seemed to everyone even more arrogant than usual, and his presence on this occasion appeared such an act of aggression in this assembly that was jealous of its honour, that everyone considered it a breach of etiquette, while several thought it an act of bravado, and a few took it as an insult. Clearly the whole chamber was burning with eagerness to begin the debate. The accusing newspaper could be seen in everyone's hands, but, as is always the case, no one was keen to take on the responsibility of opening the attack. Finally, one honourable peer, a declared enemy of the Comte de Morcerf, mounted the tribune with a solemnity that proclaimed the long-expected moment had come. There was a fearful silence. Only Morcerf remained unaware of the reason for this awed attention, paid for once to an orator who was seldom accorded such an attentive audience. The Count sat, unruffled, through the preamble in which the speaker announced that he was going to speak of something so serious, so solemn, and so vital to the House that it demanded the full attention of his colleagues. At the first mention of the words Janina and Colonel Fernand, however, Morcerf went so horribly pale that the whole assembly was convulsed by a single shudder, and all eyes turned on the Count. Moral wounds have the peculiarity that they are invisible, but do not close. Always painful, always ready to bleed when touched, they remain tender and open in the heart. When the article had been read in the midst of this silence, which was then ruffled by a stir that ceased as soon as the speaker indicated that he was about to continue, the accuser described his misgivings and began to suggest what a hard task he had taken on. It was Monsieur de Morcerf's honour and that of the whole house that he sought to defend, by initiating a debate that would deal with these still controversial personal questions. Finally, he concluded by asking for an inquiry to be set up, rapidly enough to nip this slander in the bud and avenge Monsieur de Morcerf by restoring him to the position that public opinion had for so long accorded him. Morcerf was shaking, smitten by this enormous and unexpected calamity to the point where he could barely stammer out a few words, while casting a haggard look at the faces of his colleagues. His diffidence, which could equally well indicate the astonishment of an innocent man as the shame of a guilty one, gained him some sympathy. Truly generous men are always ready to feel compassion when their enemy's misfortune exceeds the bounds of their hatred. The chairman asked for a vote on the inquiry, which was held by members rising or remaining seated. The result was that the inquiry would be held. The Count was asked how long he would need to prepare his defence. Morcerf's strength had returned as soon as he realised he had survived this terrible blow. "Gentlemen and fellow peers," he said, "time is not what one needs to repel an attack such as that which is here being directed against me by unknown enemies, who are no doubt hiding in the shadows of their own obscurity. I must reply instantly, like a thunderbolt, to this flash of lightning that for an instant dazzled me. How I wish that, instead of such self-justification, I could spill my blood to prove to my colleagues that I am worthy to be counted as one of their peers." These words made a favourable impression. "Consequently," he continued, "I request that the inquiry should be held as soon as possible, and I shall give the House all the documents necessary to facilitate it." "When would you like the inquiry to begin?" asked the chairman. "I am at the disposal of the House immediately," the Count replied. The chairman rang his bell. "Is the House of the opinion that this inquiry should take place today?" he asked. "Yes," came the unanimous reply from the assembly. A 12-member commission was chosen to decide what documents Morcerf should be required to provide. The first session of this commission was to convene at 8 o'clock in the evening in the offices of the House. If several sessions were needed, they would be held at the same time in the same place. Once this had been decided, Morcerf asked permission to retire. He had to collect the documents that he had long been gathering, to brave a storm that his cunning and indomitable character had warned him would eventually descend upon him. Beauchamp told the young man everything that we have just told the reader, with the difference that his account enjoyed the immediacy of a living thing as compared to a dead one. Albert listened, trembling now with hope, now with anger, at times with shame. For, from what Beauchamp had confided to him, he knew that his father was guilty, and wondered how, in that case, he could succeed in proving his innocence. When he got to this point, Beauchamp paused. "And then?" Albert asked. "And then," Beauchamp repeated. "Yes?" "My friend, that word imposes a dreadful compulsion on me. Do you wish to know what happened next?" "There is absolutely no alternative, and I should prefer to learn it from your lips, my friend, than from any others." "Very well," said Beauchamp. "Prepare your courage, Albert, because you will never have had greater need of it." Albert drew a hand across his forehead to reassure himself as to his own strength, like a man preparing to defend his life who tests his armour and flexes the blade of his sword. He felt strong, mistaking his fever for energy. "Go on," he said. "The evening came," Beauchamp continued. "All Paris was on tenterhooks. Many people said that your father had only to show himself for the charges to collapse, while many others said that he would not appear. Some claimed they had seen him leaving for Brussels, and a few went to the police to ask if it was true, as they had heard that the Count had collected his passport. I admit that I did everything I could," Beauchamp went on, "to get a member of the commission, a young peer who was a friend of mine, to gain admission for me to some kind of gallery in the chamber. At 7 o'clock he came to fetch me, and, before anyone else had arrived, handed me over to an usher who shut me into a sort of box, like a box in the theatre. I was concealed by a pillar and wrapped in total darkness, so I could reasonably hope to see and hear each of the terrible events that were about to take place. By 8 o'clock exactly, everyone had assembled. Monsieur de Morcerf came in just as the clock had finished striking. He had some papers in his hands, and his face appeared calm. For him, his manner was unusually simple, and his dress studied and severe. In the manner of an old soldier, he wore his coat buttoned from top to bottom. His entrance was very favourably received. The commission was certainly not ill-disposed towards him, and several of its members came over to offer him their hands. Albert felt that his heart would break on learning these details, yet in the midst of his pain he experienced a feeling of gratitude. He would like to have been able to embrace these men who had given his father this sign of their esteem when his honour had been so gravely challenged. At that moment an usher came in and gave the chairman a letter. "You have the floor, Monsieur de Morcerf," he said as he was breaking the seals. The Count began his defence, and I assure you, Albert, Beauchamp went on, he spoke with extraordinary eloquence and skill. He produced documents to prove that the Vizier of Janina, to his very last hour, had honoured him with his entire confidence, since he had entrusted him with a life-and-death mission to the Emperor himself. He showed the ring, a token of authority which Ali Pasha commonly used to seal his letters, and which he had given him so that when he returned he could have access to him, at whatever hour of the day or night, even if he was in his harem. Unfortunately, he said, his mission had failed, and when he returned to defend his benefactor, Ali was already dead. But as he died, the Count said, so great was Ali Pasha's confidence in him that he had entrusted his favourite mistress and their daughter to him. Albert shuddered at these words, because, even while Beauchamp was speaking, the young man was recalling the whole of Haydée's story, and he remembered what the beautiful Greek girl had said about that message, that ring, and how she was sold into slavery. What was the effect of the Count's speech? Albert asked anxiously. I must admit I found it moving, and so did the whole commission, said Beauchamp. However, the chairman casually glanced at the letter that had just been brought to him, but as he read those first lines, his interest was awakened. He read it once, then again, and said, looking hard at Monsieur de Morcerf, Count, you have just told us that the Vizier of Janina entrusted his wife and daughter to you. Yes, Monsieur, Morcerf replied, but here, as in the rest, I was pursued by misfortune. On my return, Vasiliki and her daughter Haydée had vanished. Did you know them? The confidence that the Pasha placed in my loyalty and the intimate nature of our relationship meant that I was able to see them more than 20 times. Have you any idea what became of them? Yes, monsieur, I heard that they succumbed to their grief and perhaps to poverty. I was not rich, my own life was in serious danger, and to my regret I was not able to look for them. The chairman frowned imperceptibly. Gentlemen, he said, you have heard what Monsieur le Comte de Morcerf has said, and followed his explanation. Now, Count, can you bring forward any witness in support of the account that you have just given us? Alas, no, monsieur, the Count replied. All those around the Vizier who knew me at his court are either dead or scattered across the world. I believe that I am alone among my compatriots to have survived that frightful war. I have the letters of Ali Tebelin, which I have shown you. I have the ring, which was the token of his authority. Here it is. And finally, I have the most convincing refutation that I can supply to this anonymous attack, which is the absence of any witness against my word as an honourable man and the unblemished record of my military career. A murmur of approval ran through the assembly. At that moment, Albert, if nothing had intervened, your father's case was won. All that was left was to proceed to a vote, when the chairman asked to be heard. Gentlemen, he said, and you, Count, I suppose you will not be displeased to hear someone who claims to be a very important witness, and who has just presented himself here of his own accord. Having listened to our colleague, we cannot doubt that this witness will prove his entire innocence. Here is the letter that I have just received on the matter. Would you like it to be read out, or will you decide to discard it and ignore this incident? Monsieur de Morcerf paled and gripped the papers he was holding even tighter, so that they rustled audibly in his hands. The commission decided to hear the letter. As for the Count, he was thoughtful and offered no opinion one way or the other. So the chairman read the following. Monsieur le Président, I can supply the most definite information to the Commission of Inquiry which has been charged with examining the conduct in Epirus and Macedonia of Lieutenant General the Comte de Morcerf. Here the chairman paused. The colour drained from the Count's face, and the chairman looked inquiringly round the assembly. Carry on, they cried in every part of the room. The chairman continued. I was present at the death of Ali Pasha. I witnessed his final moments. I know what became of Vasiliki and Haydée. I am at the disposal of the commission, and even demand the honour of being heard. I shall be in the hall of the house at the moment when this letter is given to you. And who is this witness, or rather this enemy? The Count asked, in a voice which was audibly and profoundly distorted by his feelings. That we shall discover, monsieur, the chairman replied. Does the commission agree that we should hear this witness? Yes, yes, every voice cried simultaneously. The usher was recalled. Usher, the chairman asked, is there someone waiting in the hall? Yes, monsieur le président. Who is this person? A lady accompanied by a servant. Everyone exchanged glances. "Bring her in," said the chairman. 5 minutes later, the usher reappeared. Every eye was fixed on the door. And I too, Beauchamp added, shared in the general mood of expectation and anxiety. Behind the usher walked a woman wrapped in a large cloak which entirely concealed her. Under it, from the shape it outlined and the perfumes that it exhaled, one could guess at the presence of an elegant young woman, but no more. The chairman asked the stranger to remove her veil, and it could then be seen that she was dressed in Greek costume, and in addition to that she was of outstanding beauty. "Ah," said Morcerf. "Her." "Whom do you mean, her?" "Haydée." "Who told you?" "Alas, I guessed it. But, Beauchamp, please continue. You can see that I am calm and strong. We must be coming to the end." Monsieur de Morcerf, Beauchamp continued, looked at the woman with a mixture of surprise and alarm. For him it was life or death that hung on those charming lips, while for everyone else this was such a strange and curious adventure that the loss or salvation of Monsieur de Morcerf had become a secondary consideration. The chairman gestured the young woman towards a seat, but she indicated that she would remain standing. As for the Count, he had fallen back into his chair, and it was clear that his legs would no longer carry him. "Madame," the chairman said, "you wrote to the commission to offer some information about the affair at Janina, and you claim that you were an eyewitness of the events." "Indeed I was," the stranger replied, with a voice imbued with a delightful sadness, and stamped with that sonorousness peculiar to Oriental voices. "However," the chairman said, "permit me to remark that you were very young at that time." "I was 4 years old, but since the events were of supreme significance to me, not a single detail has left my mind, and not one circumstance has escaped my memory." "What significance, then, can these events have had for you? Who are you, for this great catastrophe to have produced such a profound impression on you?" "It was a matter of the life or death of my father," the young woman replied. "My name is Haydée, daughter of Ali Tebelin, Pasha of Janina, and Vasiliki, his well-beloved wife." The blush, at once modest and proud, that spread across the young woman's cheeks, the flame in her eyes, and the solemnity of her revelation produced an indescribable effect on the assembly. As for the Count, he could not have been more smitten if a thunderbolt had fallen, opening a pit at his feet. "Madame," the chairman continued, after bowing respectfully, "allow me to ask one simple question, without casting doubt on your words, which will be the last. Have you any proof of what you say?" "I do, monsieur," Haydée said, taking from under her cloak a sachet of perfumed satin. "Here is the certificate of my birth, drawn up by my father and signed by his principal officials. And here, with the certificate of my birth, is that of my baptism, my father having agreed that I might be brought up in the religion of my mother. This certificate bears the seal of the great primate of Macedonia and Epirus. Finally, and this is doubtless the most important, here is the bill for the sale of my person and that of my mother to the Armenian merchant El Kobir by this Frankish officer, who, in his infamous dealings with Laporte, had reserved as his share of the booty the wife and daughter of his benefactor, and sold them for the sum of 1,000 purses, that is to say, for approximately 400,000 francs. A greenish pallor spread across the Comte de Morcerf's cheeks, and his eyes became shot with blood as these terrible charges were spelled out, to be greeted by the assembly in melancholy silence. Haydée, still calm, but far more threatening in her calm than another might have been in anger, passed the bill of sale across to the chairman. It was written in Arabic, but since it had been anticipated that some of the documents produced might be in Arabic, Ramaic, or Turkish, the parliamentary interpreter had been asked to stand by, and he was called. One of the peers, who knew Arabic, having learned the language during the glorious Egyptian campaign, followed the words on the parchment as the translator read them aloud. I, El Kobir, slave dealer and supplier of His Royal Highness's harem, acknowledge having received from the Frankish lord, Count of Monte Cristo, for delivery to the most glorious emperor, an emerald valued at 2,000 purses, in payment for a young Christian slave, aged 11 years, by the name Hedi, legitimate daughter of the late Lord Ali Tebelin, Pasha of Janina, and Vasiliki, his favourite, the same having been sold to me 7 years ago, with her mother, who died on arrival at Constantinople by a Frankish colonel in the service of the Vizier Ali Tebelin, named Fernand Mondego. The above-mentioned sale was made on behalf of His Royal Highness, by whom I was mandated, for the amount of 1,000 purses. In Constantinople, with authorization from His Royal Highness, year 1274 of the Hegira. Signed, El Kobir. The present deed is fully and properly authenticated by the imperial seal, which the vendor must show is attached. Near the merchant's signature one could indeed see the seal of the august emperor. A dreadful silence followed the reading of the letter and the sight of the seal. The Count was powerless to do anything but stare. His eyes, fastened as though involuntarily on Hedi, were shot with blood and flames. "Madame," the chairman said, "can we not speak to the Count of Monte Cristo, who is in Paris together with you, I believe?" "Monsieur," Hedi replied, "the Count of Monte Cristo, my second father, has been in Normandy for the past 3 days." "In that case, madame," the chairman said, "who advised you to take this step, though the court thanks you for it, and it was quite natural in view of your birth and your misfortunes?" "This was dictated to me by my respect and my sorrow, monsieur," Hedi replied. "God forgive me, though I am a Christian, I have always thought to avenge my illustrious father. After I set foot in France and learned that the traitor lived in Paris, my eyes and my ears remained constantly open. I lived in seclusion in the house of my noble protector, but I live thus because I love obscurity and silence, which allow me to inhabit my own thoughts and meditations. The Count of Monte Cristo surrounds me with his paternal care, and I am aware of all that goes on in the world, but I only hear distant echoes of it. I read all the newspapers, just as I am sent all the albums and all the new music. Because I follow the lives of others without taking part in them, I learned of what happened this morning in the house, and what was to take place here this evening, and I wrote to you." "So the Count of Monte Cristo is not involved in what you have done?" the chairman asked. "He is quite unaware of it, monsieur, and I am afraid of only one thing, which is that he will disapprove when he finds out about it. However," the young woman went on, looking with burning eyes towards heaven, "it is a fine day for me, now that I have at last the opportunity to avenge my father." Throughout all this, the Count had not spoken a single word. His colleagues were looking at him, and no doubt pitying this greatness that had been blown away by the scented breath of a woman. The dreadful marks of his misfortune were little by little appearing on his face. "Monsieur de Morcerf," said the chairman, "do you recognize this lady as the daughter of Ali Tebelin, Pasha of Janina?" "No," Morcerf said, attempting to rise. "This is a tissue of lies woven by my enemies." Hedi, who had been looking intently towards the door as if expecting someone, turned sharply and, on seeing the Count on his feet, gave an awful cry. "You do not recognize me," she said. "Well, fortunately I recognize you. You are Fernand Mondego, the Frankish officer who was instructor to the troops of my noble father. You it was who betrayed the castles of Janina. You it was who, having been sent by your benefactor to deal directly on the matter of his life or death with the emperor, brought back a false firman giving him a complete pardon. You it was who, with this firman, obtained the Pasha's ring which could command the obedience of Selim, keeper of the fire. You it was who stabbed Selim. You it was who sold us, my mother and me, to the merchant El Kobir. Assassin! 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 Your master's blood is still on your brow. Let it be seen by all." These words were spoken with such passionate conviction that all eyes turned towards the Count, and he even put his hand to his forehead as if he had felt Ali's blood on it, still warm. "So do you positively identify Monsieur de Morcerf as this same officer, Fernand Mondego?" "Indeed I do recognize him," Haydée exclaimed. "Oh, my mother, you told me you were free, you had a father whom you loved, you were destined to be almost a queen. Look well on this man. He it is who has made you a slave, who raised your father's head on the end of a pike, who sold us, who betrayed us. Look well on his right hand, the one that bears a broad scar. Should you forget his face, you would recognize him by that hand into which, one by one, fell the coins of the merchant El Kobir. Indeed, I do recognize him. Oh, let him say now that he does not recognize me." Each word fell like the blow of a cutlass on Morcerf and drained a part of his energy. At the last words, he involuntarily hastened to conceal his hand in his coat. It was indeed disfigured by a wound. Then he fell back into his seat, plunged into the desolation of utter despair. This scene had caused a commotion among the minds of all those present, which swirled like the leaves torn from a tree by the powerful north wind. "Monsieur de Morcerf," said the chairman, do not let your courage fail you. Reply. The justice of the court is supreme and equal, for all like that of God. It will not let you be crushed by your enemies without providing you with the means to combat them. Would you like further inquiries to be made? Do you wish me to order 2 members of the commission to visit Janina? Speak." Morcerf said nothing. At this, all the members of the commission looked at one another with a sort of horror. They knew the Count's powerful and aggressive character. It would take the most terrible blow to overwhelm this man's defences. It must be that this silence, which was like a slumber, would be followed by an awakening that would be like thunder. "Well then," asked the chairman, "what have you decided?" "Nothing," the Count said in a toneless voice, rising to his feet. "Then has the daughter of Ali Tebelin really told us the truth?" said the chairman. "Is she really the awful witness to whom the guilty man never dares to answer no? Did you really do all these things that she accuses you of doing?" The Count looked around him with an expression that would have melted the heart of a tiger, but which could not disarm a judge. Then he raised his eyes towards the vaulted ceiling, as if fearing that it might open to reveal that second tribunal which is called Heaven, and that other judge who is called God. At last, with a sudden movement, he tore open the tightly buttoned coat that seemed to stifle him, and left the room like a disconsolate madman. For a short while his footsteps echoed lugubriously down the passage, and soon the rumbling of the carriage as it galloped away with him shook the portico of the Florentine building. "Gentlemen," said the chairman when the sounds had died away, "does Monsieur de Morcerf stand convicted of felony, treason, and conduct unworthy of a member of this house?" "Yes," replied all the members of the commission of inquiry with one voice. Haydée had stayed until the very end of the session. She heard the Count's guilt pronounced without a single muscle on her face expressing either pity or joy. Then, once more covering herself with her veil, majestically she took her leave of the councillors, and walked out with that bearing which Virgil described as the walk of a goddess. Chapter 87. Provocation. "So I took advantage of the silence and darkness in the room," Beauchamp went on, "to leave without being seen. The usher who had brought me in was waiting for me at the door. He conducted me through the corridors to a little door opening onto the Rue de Vaugirard. I left with my heart at once shattered and enchanted. Albert, forgive me for saying it, shattered with regard to you, but enchanted by the nobility of that young woman seeking to avenge her father. Yes, Albert, wherever this revelation came from, and I grant you that it may have been from an enemy, I swear that that enemy was an agent of Providence. Albert was holding his head in both hands. He raised a face that was red with shame and bathed in tears, and grasped Beauchamp's arm. "Friend," he said, "my life is over. All that remains for me is not to say, as you do, that Providence dealt me this blow, but to seek out the man who has been pursuing me with this hatred. Then, when I know his name, I shall kill him, or else he will kill me. I am counting on your friendship to assist me, Beauchamp, provided that contempt has not driven friendship from your heart." "Contempt, my dear friend? How can this misfortune affect you? No, thank God. We no longer live in a time when children were blindly and unjustly made responsible for the deeds of their fathers. Recall your whole life, Albert. It has been brief, but was the dawning of a summer's day ever purer than your beginnings? No, Albert. Take my advice. You are young. You are rich. Leave France. Everything is soon forgotten in this Babylon with its tumultuous life and changing fashions. Come back in 3 or 4 years' time, when you have married some Russian princess, and no one will recall what happened yesterday, still less what happened 16 years ago. Thank you, my dear Beauchamp. Thank you for the excellent intentions that inspire your words, but it cannot be. I have told you my wish, and now, if necessary, I shall change the word wish to will. You must understand that, being involved as I am in the matter, I cannot see it in the same light as you do. What appears to you to have some celestial origin seems to me to come from an impurer source. I have to admit that Providence appears to me to have nothing to do with all this. And fortunately so, because instead of an invisible and intangible messenger bringing celestial rewards and punishments, I shall find a tangible and visible being on whom I may be revenged. Oh yes, I swear to you that I shall, for all that I have suffered over the past month. Now, Beauchamp, I repeat, I want to return to the solid reality of human life, and if you are still the friend that you say you are, help me to find the hand that struck this blow." "Very well, then," said Beauchamp. "If you are determined to bring me back to earth, back I must come. If you are set upon hunting down an enemy, I shall hunt with you, and I shall find him, for my honour is almost as much implicated as yours." "Then let's start our inquiries now, without delay. Every moment that we do delay is an eternity for me. The author of this denunciation has not yet been punished. He may hope that he will not be, but on my honour, if he does hope so, he is mistaken. Listen to me, Morcerf." "Beauchamp, I can see that you know something. You restore me to life." I am not saying that this is the answer, Albert, but I can see a light in the darkness, and we may follow it to our goal. "Tell me. You can see I'm boiling over with impatience." "There is something that I did not want to let you know when I returned from Janina." "Tell me." "Here is what happened. Naturally, I went to the first banker in town to obtain information. As soon as I mentioned the matter, and even before your father's name was spoken, he said, 'Ah, I can guess why you are here.' 'How can you, and why?' 'Because barely a fortnight ago I was questioned on the same subject.' 'By whom?' 'By a banker in Paris, an associate of mine.' 'Whose name is?' 'Monsieur Danglars.' "'Him?' Albert cried. "He has long pursued my poor father with jealous hatred, supposedly a man of the people. He cannot forgive the Count de Morcerf for being a peer of the realm. And what about that marriage? Broken off for no specific reason? It must be him." "Find out, Albert, but don't get carried away until you know." Find out, I tell you, and if it proves to be the case—" "Oh, yes, if it proves to be the case," the young man exclaimed. "He will repay me for all I have suffered." "Be careful, Morcerf. He is already an old man." "I shall take heed of his age as he took heed of my family's honour. If he had a quarrel with my father, why did he not strike him? Oh, no, he was afraid to confront the man. I'm not criticizing you, Albert, but I do want to restrain you. Be cautious." "Don't worry. In any case, Beauchamp, you will come with me. Such solemn matters must be dealt with in front of witnesses. Before the end of today, if Monsieur Danglars is guilty, Monsieur Danglars will have ceased to live, or I shall be dead. By heavens, Beauchamp, I want to bury my honour with all due ceremony." "Very well. When one has taken such a resolve, Albert, it must be carried out at once. Do you want to visit Monsieur Danglars? Then let's go." They sent out for a hired cab. As they turned into the drive of the banker's house, they noticed Andrea Cavalcanti's phaeton and servant at the door. "Well, I never. There's a stroke of luck," said Albert in a grim voice. "If Monsieur Danglars does not want to fight with me, I shall kill his son-in-law. A Cavalcanti must fight, surely." The young man was announced to the banker, who, knowing what had happened the previous evening, heard Albert's name and forbade him entry. But it was too late. He had followed the lackey, heard the order being given, pushed open the door and went through into the banker's study, followed by Beauchamp. "But, monsieur, what is this?" Danglars exclaimed. "Can one no longer be allowed to choose whom one shall or shall not receive in one's home? I think you are forgetting yourself." "No, monsieur," said Albert. "There are some circumstances, yours included, when one must be at home, at least to certain people, unless one pleads cowardice. You may choose that alternative." "So what do you want with me, monsieur?" "I want," said Morcerf, coming over to him without appearing to pay any attention to Cavalcanti, who was leaning against the mantelpiece. "I want to suggest a meeting with you in a quiet spot, where no one will trouble you for 10 minutes. I ask no longer, and where, of 2 men who have met there, one will remain among the leaves." Danglars went pale, and Cavalcanti started. Albert turned to the young man and said, "Why, do come if you wish, Count. You have the right to be there. You are almost one of the family. When I give this kind of invitation, it is open to as many people as there may be to accept it." Cavalcanti looked dumbfounded at Danglars, who, with an effort, got up and came to stand between the 2 young men. Albert's attack on Andrea had put the matter on a different footing, and he began to hope that his visit had a different motive from the one he had supposed. "Ah, I understand, monsieur," he said to Albert. "If you have come here to pick a fight with this gentleman because I preferred him over you, I must warn you that it will be a matter for the public prosecutor." "You are mistaken, monsieur," said Morcerf with a grim smile. "I am not speaking at all about marriage, and I only addressed myself to Monsieur Cavalcanti because it appeared that he might momentarily have considered intervening in our discussion. But then, on the other hand," he added, "you are right. Today I am ready to pick a fight with everybody. But have no fear, Monsieur Danglars, you shall have priority." "Monsieur," Danglars said, white with anger and fear, "I warn you that when I have the misfortune to come across a rabid mastiff blocking my path, I kill it. And far from thinking myself guilty, I consider I have done a service to society. So I warn you, if you are rabid and try to bite me, I shall strike you down without pity. I ask you, is it my fault if your father has been dishonoured?" "Yes, you wretch!" cried Morcerf. "It is your fault." Danglars stepped backwards. "My fault? he said. Mine? Do I know anything about Greek history? Have I travelled in those countries? Did I advise your father to hand over the castles of Janina, to betray— Silence, said Albert in a stern voice. No, it was not you directly who created this scandal and caused this misfortune, but you it was who hypocritically initiated it. I? Yes, you. Where else did the revelation come from? But the newspaper told you that. From Janina, of course. And who wrote to Janina? To Janina? Yes. Who wrote to ask for information about my father? I suppose that anyone can write to Janina. Yet only one person did write. Only one? Yes, and that person was you. Certainly I did write. It seems to me that when you are marrying your daughter to a young man, you should obtain some information about his family. To do so is not only one's right, but one's duty. You wrote, monsieur, said Albert, knowing perfectly well what reply you would receive. What? Ah, now I swear to you, Danglars exclaimed, with a certainty and confidence that may perhaps have come even less from his fear than from the interest he felt in his heart for the unfortunate young man. I swear to you that I should never have considered writing of my own accord. Whatever did I know about the catastrophe that befell Ali Pasha? So, did anyone suggest that you write? Indeed they did. Someone encouraged you to do it? Yes. Who did? Tell me, go on. But nothing could be easier. I was speaking of your father's past, and saying that the origin of his fortune had always remained a mystery. This person asked me where your father had made his fortune, so I replied, in Greece. And he said, then write to Janina. Who gave you this advice? It was the Count of Monte Cristo, your friend. The Count told you to write to Janina? Yes, and I did so. Do you want to see the letters? I can show them to you. Albert and Beauchamp exchanged looks. Monsieur, Beauchamp said, up to this point having taken no part in the conversation, it appears that you are accusing the Count when he is away from Paris and cannot answer the charge. I am accusing no one, monsieur, said Danglars. I am telling you, and I shall repeat in front of the Count of Monte Cristo what I have just said before you. Does the Count know what reply you received? I showed it to him. Did he know that my father's Christian name was Fernand and his surname Mondego? Yes, I told him that a long time ago. Moreover, I only acted in all this as anyone else would, and I may perhaps have done less than many others. When, on the day after this reply, at the instigation of Monsieur de Monte Cristo, your father came to ask me for my daughter officially, as one does when one wants to conclude a match, I refused. I refused outright, it's true, but without giving an explanation and without making a stir. Why should I cause any trouble? What do I care for the honour or dishonour of Monsieur de Morcerf? There's no percentage in it for me either way. Albert felt himself blush. There could be no further doubt. Danglars was defending himself basely, but with the confidence of a man who is speaking, if not the whole truth, at least a part of it. Not for motives of conscience, admittedly, but through fear. In any case, what did Morcerf want? It was not either the greater or lesser guilt of Danglars or Monte Cristo. It was a man who would answer for the offence, whether great or small. A man who would fight, and it was clear that Danglars would not. Then, one by one, certain things that he had forgotten or failed to notice became visible to his eyes and present in his memory. Monte Cristo knew everything, since he had bought the daughter of Ali Pasha, and, knowing everything, He had advised Danglars to write to Janina. Once he knew the reply, he had granted Albert's wish to be introduced to Haydée, and, once in her presence, he had allowed the conversation to turn to the death of Ali, not objecting to Haydée's story, but no doubt instructing the young woman, in the few words of Ramaic that he spoke to her, not to allow Morcerf to recognize his father. Moreover, had he not requested Morcerf to avoid mentioning his father's name in front of Haydée? Finally, he had taken Albert to Normandy at the very moment when he knew that the scandal would break. There could no longer be any doubt. All this was part of a plot, and, without any doubt, Monte Cristo was in collusion with his father's enemies. Albert led Beauchamp into a corner and told him what he thought. "You are right," Beauchamp said. "Monsieur Danglars is only implicated in the crude operational part of what has happened. If you want an explanation, you must ask Monte Cristo for it." Albert turned around. "Monsieur," he said to Danglars, "you will understand that I am not definitively taking my leave of you. I still need to confirm that your charges are correct, and I shall go at once to do so from the Count of Monte Cristo." And bowing to the banker, he left with Beauchamp, without appearing to pay any further heed to Cavalcanti. Danglars accompanied them to the door, and there repeated his assurance to Albert that he felt no personal animosity towards the Comte de Morcerf. And I think that is where we shall end for now.